Good evening, students and parents. Hope you're doing well. This is a very easy reading passage. It is the beginning of third grade or the end of second grade. So there shouldn't be too many words that have to be included in the vocabulary or written off to the right. I'm assuming that everyone is going to be able to read this pretty easily. Those of you who are reading at grade level, don't try and read it too fast. I want everybody to use a reading card on this exercise. So you discover your mind's eyes. In other words, your eyes see the words and your mind records the words before you even say the words. And we're going to take advantage of this to become better readers. This is a good opportunity to do that with something that's a little bit easier. We're also going to be looking at the genre, craft, and structure of this because we're going to be writing personal narratives, first-person narratives in our videos coming up. And this is a good example of how to lay out a first-person narrative using 3 paragraphs. This is our fluency reading for week 20, and it is extremely easy. This is an end of second grade, beginning third grade reading, and it's probably the easiest reading you're going to see. But we're going to use this part of it for doing many other things other than just reading it. I don't think you're going to have too many words to write down here on the right hand side because most of you are going to know these words. Good readers are only going to be able to read this once through and then give them a break, maybe once a day. And I know who is good readers and who is struggling a little bit. But parents, you do not have to have them read this continuously. We're just going to use this as a model for our writing this week. So let's get to it. So there's 2 things we're going to do about this essay. 2 things to do with this essay. One, we're going to use a reading card. And using the reading cards helps us use our mind's eyes. I bet you didn't think your mind had eyes, but we're going to show you how to use a reading card if you're having difficulty, even if you aren't having difficulty, because I don't think many of you are going to have difficulty with this, but still using a reading card, none the same, to play a little game. Number 2 is we're going to look closely at the genre, the craft, and the structure. So we're going to pay close attention to this up here this time. And I guess there's 3 things we're going to do with this. We're going to be looking at this so we can use it as a model for our own writing. So that's really the 2 things we're going to do with this. I know it sounds like a lot, and we aren't going to get into writing just right away. We're going to tackle some of the harder parts that everyone has when they try and sit down to write something. And that's going to be in the writing video. So let's just take this first one, using a reading card. Use a reading card using your mind's eye. Okay. Here's a 3x5 index card, they call these. You can get these at Dollar Tree. You can get them at any convenience store. You can get them everywhere. You can get the supermarket. Walmart obviously has them. Very easy, very inexpensive. And what we do is we use the card, and you've seen me do this before, but we're going to take something very easy to use this with. And we're going to place it at the top of the first paragraph, and as we read, we're going to slide this card down and cover up the words that we've already said. Don't use a card at the bottom like this. If some of you have been shown that it is absolutely incorrect, and it is not improving your reading one bit. We're going to use the card above because this is what your eye needs to see to read. If you use a card below, then here's all these words down here that your eyes are actually looking at. Your mind's eye is looking at those words, but you can't see them if you covered them up. So that's why we're using this reading card. We're going to use our mind's eyes using this reading card. So you may want to do a first read. I doubt if there's very few words you're going to write over here in the right-hand column because most of these words are vocabulary you're familiar with. We're just using the exercise of as I cover up, as I read a sentence, I'm going to cover that sentence up. Now you're going to find out that when you get towards the end of a sentence like this, before you say she lives in the sky and, you can cover that up. While you're saying those words, you can cover that word up while your mind looks at the words that you're going to read in the future. So your mind's eyes doesn't necessarily have to see every word every time you come across it. It can look ahead while your voice is talking about something behind, and you can cover up the whole sentence. So if you're a really good reader, I'm going to challenge you to try and cover up more words. If you're a reader that's kind of struggling with fourth grade reading, maybe only cover up the last 3 or 4 words at the end here, or maybe even just one word at the end here. And then each time you read this, try and cover up more and more words at one time. Some of you are going to be able to read ridiculously fast, which is not the goal here, but it's just to be able to understand that your mind sees words, your mind's eye sees words, and you don't have to read individual words each time. And an easy passage is the way to start with that. And this is a very easy passage. So a ride with Mother Nature. Already sounds like a little bit of fiction. But again, we're kind of just looking at as how they put this together. So I'm going to go ahead and read with my mind's eye 3x5 file card. They say most things are caused by Mother Nature. Well, I got to meet Mother Nature, and she is some lady. She lives in the sky and races around on a cloud. It was last spring when I was climbing the world's tallest tree when I met her. She zoomed up in her cloud and asked me if I wanted a ride. She held out a tiny hand and smiled so wide that the wrinkles in her face went away. I climbed onto the cloud and went off. Boy, that cloud went fast. It even had onboard steering. Mother Nature showed me how to stir up mountain storms. She showed me how she tricked the oceans to make tides. We raced over huge forests. The trees are my children, she said. When they get tired and droop their leaves, I send down snow to help them sleep. When it's time for them to wake up again, I blow the warm breath of springtime. She blew a springtime breath there, and I saw those trees grow leaves. Flowers sprouted. It was something. When we got back, my tree was waiting. I climbed down and told everyone about my ride with Mother Nature. I don't think they believed me, though. You believe me, don't you? Okay, so you can see how I covered up, as I went down, parts of the sentence that my mind could see with my eyes, and I wasn't reading this part, I was reading the part over here that was already covered up, and then my eyes came over here and started reading again, and when I got to about here somewhere, my mind could read the whole sentence ahead of my mouth, and I could cover that up and say that and then start over here again. So this is just kind of a fun thing to know that your mind can do this and that your reading can improve by using that technique. Let's look at the second part. Look closely at the genre. So, do people actually fly around on clouds? So this is imaginary. So we're going to say this is fiction. Now I'm not going to ask you to write fiction. because it's pretty difficult to write fiction. It's a little bit easier to write about something that's nonfiction, something that's not imaginary, but something that actually you are the expert at. But again, we're looking at how the author put this together. So it's fiction. It's almost mythology, but it's written as a narrative. And it is a first-person narrative. So this is a first-person narrative, and that's what we're going to focus on, whether it's fiction or not. Now, I can't tell. Mother Nature is a she, but you can tell it's a first-person narrative because of all these I's. I got to meet Mother Nature. I was climbing. These are very short parts of much longer sentences. I climbed onto the cloud. Boy, that cloud was fast. Can you tell if this is a boy or a girl? I really can't. The trees are my children. When they got tired and when they get tired, they drop their leaves. I sent down snow to help them. So she's explaining this. So that's in quotation marks. So we have some quotation marks. There's some speaking parts here. She blew the springtime. We got back. I'm just kind of summarizing through this. I climbed. Okay, here he's climbing again. There's a lot of climbing in this story. Down and told everyone, I do not think they believe me. And then you believe me, don't you? He's talking to the writer here. Just as a side note, this is called the second person. So anytime the writer is actually talking to the person that's reading, it's called the second person. You won't have to worry about that. That'll be for 5th grade. So let's look at how they crafted this. Let's go ahead and number our paragraphs. Because that's how authors craft stories. They craft stories not by individual sentences. They craft stories by paragraphs. And if you remember from one of our previous stories, and something that we've been looking at when we've been kind of mapping out stories, not just mapping out sentences, we call this particular part one thing, we call this particular part another thing, and we call this particular part another thing. So there's 3 parts to a story. Each part is called a separate piece, and each is written differently. Do you remember what this first part was called? If you said an introduction, you're right. This part at the end was called a what? If you said conclusion, you're correct. And then all this in between, which is the major part of it. You notice the introduction and the conclusion are relatively fewer words, but the story part in here is called what? If you said the body, you correct. This is the making of a 3-paragraph essay. Well, it's not really an essay. Essays are usually on things that are true. So let's call this, I don't know, for a loss of better words, let's call it a 3-paragraph narrative. It's a fictitious narrative, so mostly things I write in fiction aren't narrative. And it has an introduction, a body, and conclusion. And the structure was something he did in the beginning, and then he returned. So he left on a cloud, he came back on the same cloud, climbed down, and then he concluded it. So this is a sequence again. A lot of stories follow a sequence. It's a very easy way of telling a story, is things happening in a sequential order, one thing happening after another after another. There is some cause and effect in here, which is also a sequence. But let's just look at this introduction, this body, and conclusion in the next video.